In this video, I'll be going through my setup that I use to film mountain biking. I'll cover the actual physical setup with the GoPro, the gimbal, the chest mount, go through my GoPro settings, and then kind of go through some of the changes that I tend to make in Premiere Pro when I'm editing the video. All right, so here's your setup. Stuntman chest mount, EVO SS gimbal, GoPro Hero 4 Black with Polar Pro polarizing filter. I'll have links down below in the description to every one of these products. So the advantage of the Stuntman chest mount versus the regular GoPro chesty is this big plate. For one thing, it protects your chest from the GoPro and the gimbal in case of a crash, but also it's a lot more stable. You'll notice in videos with the GoPro chesty or a knockoff version of the GoPro chesty, the handlebars are bouncing up and down. So I really prefer the stability of the Stuntman chest mount. It's also a lot more comfortable because unlike the GoPro chesty, where it's very hard, stiff plastic, this is pretty pliable, so it can conform to your chest, and that's important on longer rides. Next up is the EVO SS gimbal. I prefer the EVO SS over any of the cheaper alternatives because I really do feel like you get what you pay for. It's a better quality. I can tell videos that are filmed with cheaper gimbals because the stabilization just isn't as good and they're not as quick at keeping up in the curves. Another advantage to the EVO is that you get a 1-year warranty with it. If any time within that year you need a repair or replacement, EVO will do that for you. You can see I've gotten scratched up. I've crashed with this thing multiple times and it has held up. It's taken a beating. So the camera, I use the GoPro Hero 4 Black. The reason why I do not use the GoPro Hero 5 or 6 is because the audio is just terrible. Both of those cameras are waterproof without a case, and so the sound is just really muffled. So while the video quality is definitely better, especially on the Hero 6, it's just not worth it for such bad audio. You see I use a little foam piece to kind of cut back on the wind noise. I'm actually going to switch out to the $20 fur option from Amazon. The fur really just works a whole lot better than the foam piece. Finally, I've got the Polar Pro polarizing filter on here. The polarizer does a couple of things. It's going to make the colors a little bit more vivid, and it's going to cut out some of the haze in the sky. And it also protects the GoPro lens, although to be honest, I think a replacement lens for the GoPro is actually cheaper than this filter. All right, so that's the physical setup. Now let's take a look at the GoPro settings. I shoot in 4K. I never shoot in 2.7 or 1080. 4K just looks so much better once you upload it to YouTube. I found that anything less than 2.7K is just awful on YouTube. Shoot at 30 frames per second. I've tried 24. It just doesn't look as smooth as 30 frames per second. I have the field of view set on wide. I do not have the low light function on. Spot meter is off. Pro Tune is on. I shoot pretty much everything at a white balance of 5500, and then I will just adjust it in post if necessary. The advantage of shooting with it at a set white balance rather than auto white balance is that it doesn't change this way. In auto white balance, it's going to change from warm colors to cool colors, and it's not going to look good. I shoot with the flat color profile versus the GoPro color. The reason for that is the GoPro color is just way too much contrast, and so you end up getting blown highlights and blacked out shadows. The flat gives you a little bit higher dynamic range, and then you can add some contrast back in post, and we'll do that later. Shutter is set to auto. I don't think you can really change that. I set the ISO limit to 400. If you set it any higher than that, it really starts to get grainy, but for the most part, this isn't an issue because I'm shooting in bright light anyways, and 400 is just fine. Sharpness stays set on low. If you shoot on high sharpness or even medium sharpness, it just looks unnatural. The exposure value compensation, I shoot at -1.0. The reason for this is when you're shooting in a flat color profile, if you are at 0, the highlights will be way overblown. It's just gonna be way too bright. Okay, so now we're back home. We've shot our video. We're gonna bring it into Premiere Pro, and I'll show you the settings and the changes that I make there. Okay, so now I am here in Premiere Pro and we're on the color tab here. This is a recent project from the Portal Trail. And over here on the color tab, the basic correction, you can see where I've made some changes here. So the contrast, I bumped up to 30. And it just kind of depends on the individual video. Sometimes I'll bump this up to 40, 50, even 60. It just depends on the area that I'm riding and how the light was at that time. But 30 is about as low as I'm going to go with that. Sometimes I'll also change the highlights and the shadows. And again, this just depends on the actual video itself. In this case, I just left those alone. I did, however, change the whites and the blacks. You can see I'm plus 15 on whites, negative 10 on blacks. And again, that's a general area that I'm going to be in. I may adjust it differently depending on the actual video. I'll just kind of take a look at the picture on the video and see how it looks and just kind of eyeball it. So now if we come to the creative tab and click on that, I'll make a couple more changes in here. I sharpen a little bit. So I do the low sharpening in the GoPro, and then I just do a little bit of sharpening in post. I turn the vibrance way up because the GoPro color is, or the flat color profile is, well, flat. As you can see here, this was the original, and then this is the adjusted image over here. So with the vibrance, it's going to bring some of that color back into the picture that using that flat color profile kind of took out. And then I'll add a little bit of saturation as well. I've got that at 103. Okay, so now we're going to go through the export settings because there's a couple things that I change on here. I actually have this saved as a preset. So the first thing you're going to want to do is make sure that this box is checked, use maximum render quality. I do it in 4K, frame rate 29.97 or 30 frames per second. I think this is the default square pixels, and then make sure this box is checked, render at maximum depth. This is just kind of the encoding settings on high profile level 5.2, hardware accelerated, and you can change that, yeah, software only. Yeah, it's better to be hardware accelerated. It's going to be faster. And then this just ensures kind of, again, the highest quality. On the bitrate settings, I set my target bitrate to 60. I think the default, if you go to YouTube 4K, is, I don't know, it's really low. From what I have read on YouTube, I think that they're maxing out their 4K video at like 45 to 55. So just to be safe, I choose 60 just to have kind of the best bit rate that I can. It's going to result in higher quality video on YouTube. So that's basically it, and then I'm not going to click export on this one because I've already done it, but next you would click export and then your video is done. So I hope those tips will help you to produce some quality videos of your own. Give me a thumbs up if you liked it, leave a comment down below, and consider subscribing, and I will see you on the next adventure.